Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Caroline Jean Fernald. I am Executive Director of Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, a partnership of 4 public-serving museums where our mission is to foster curiosity and a spirit of discovery in visitors of all ages, enhancing public understanding of and appreciation for the natural world, science, and human cultures. With that mission in mind, I am pleased to welcome you to tonight's program, co-sponsored by the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East and the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, and made possible thanks to the generous support of our members and donors. We are delighted to welcome Professor Rita Lucarelli from the University of California, Berkeley. And I always say that I'm delighted whenever I'm introducing speakers, but I'm especially delighted this time because I had the great pleasure of working with Rita at UC Berkeley, where I was executive director at the Hearst Museum for 4 years. And I'm a big admirer of her passion and commitment to teaching with museum collections, and in particular, having a technology-forward approach to her research and teaching, which you get to learn about today. Today, she will share her expertise on how innovative 3D and virtual reality technologies can transform the way we teach and experience ancient Egypt, drawing on the rich resources of university collections. HMSC's partnership of museums crosses many disciplines, and we host a wide array of events throughout the year at our 4 museums. On September 27th, we will celebrate Puerto Rico's rich culture and natural wonders alongside celebrated arts collective Agua Sol y Sereno, led by Pedro Adorno Irizarry. On October 15th, Lawrence M. Berman, who I think I saw here, there he is, from the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, will discuss the impact of 3 visionary Egyptian pharaohs on Egypt's art, politics, and religion. To learn more about additional upcoming museum events, I invite you to visit our website, hmsc.harvard.edu, where you can sign up for our newsletter, or you can also follow us on social media. We are grateful to all our members and supporters for making these programs possible. I will now turn it over to Peter Dermanuelian, Barbara Bell, Professor of Egyptology and Director of the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm so happy to see all of you here today as we kick off another season. We have 3 special guest Egyptology lectures coming in this semester. Tonight, of course, and the other 2 dates, as Caroline just mentioned, are Wednesday, October 15. That is Dr. Lawrence Berman. We're delighted to have him with us here tonight. And also on Wednesday, November 12th. So mark your calendars, October 15 and November 12th. But tonight, just in from California, hopefully without too much jet lag, is Professor Rita Lucarelli. She earned her MA in Egyptology from the University of Naples and her PhD from Leiden University. Her dissertation was published as The Book of the Dead of Gat-Sechen, tried to say that 3 times fast, Gat-Sechen, Ancient Egyptian Funerary Religion in the 10th century BC. She's worked as a research scholar and lecturer in the Department of Egyptology at Bonn University, where she was part of the Book of the Dead project team. She's currently Associate Professor of Egyptology at UC Berkeley and Faculty Curator of Egyptology at the Phoebe Hearst Museum of Anthropology, University of California, Berkeley, and Fellow of the Digital Humanities in Berkeley. Her specialty is the study of ancient Egyptian magic and religion and the reception history of ancient Egypt, in particular in Black visual arts and music. She's presently working on a project to produce 3D models of ancient Egyptian coffins, the Book of the Dead in 3D, and also a VR app called Return to the Tomb, which reverses the typical course of events and recreates the burial space where an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus is brought back from the museum to the tomb. She's also completing a monograph on demonology in ancient Egypt, entitled Agents of Punishment and Protection, Ancient Egyptian Demonology in the First Millennium BCE. And if that is not enough, in a truly admirable effort, she has also been teaching higher education at San Quentin Prison in California as well. Tonight, we head along with her to virtual Egypt, 3D teaching with museum collections. Please welcome Dr. Rita Lucarelli.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with this Californian weather. So actually, climate change is real. And I'm also, it's really a real pleasure to be back in Cambridge. Thank you, Peter, Caroline, for the kind invitation after a few years. And the last time I was lecturing in this same classroom was back in 2019. I gave a lecture on ancient Egyptian magic, which I realized unexpectedly reached over 400,000 views, 10,000 likes on YouTube. And so I thought it might be fitting to wave in a little magic again. Let's start with the first magic. I'm joking, this is easy to do, but anyway, in fact, I see a kind of magic in the way technology allows us to engage with the ancient world. When my students create 3D and virtual reality reconstructions of Egyptian artifacts, I like to think of them as apprentice magicians using digital tools to breathe new life into objects that have been silent for millennia. Most of the 3D visualization and DH, digital humanities oriented work that I'll share with you today come from the remarkable Egyptian collection of the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology in Berkeley, where indeed I work as you already know, as faculty curator. And I will introduce you some of the objects that we have there, although the collection is much bigger than what you will see today. I'm a firm believer in the transformative role that university museums play as hubs for teaching, learning, and exploring world heritage. These institutions are not just repositories of objects, they are gateways into history, culture, and what we broadly refer to as the global humanities. As the International Council of Museum, ICOM, emphasizes, this comes from their website, museums have no borders, they have a network. They exist within a dynamic global network connecting people, knowledge, and cultures across the world. The Hearst Museum, with its extraordinarily rich and diverse collection, is a shining example of this mission in action. And in this occasion, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the current Hearst Museum staff and executive leadership for their tireless work in supporting teaching, research, and public engagement in very difficult situations, because the museum has been for a very long time closed for a series of reasons that I'm not going to discuss here, but it's been really amazing, the commitment still to use the collection for the classroom. And it is thanks to their efforts that the Hearst Museum online portal now provides public access to over 3.8 million objects, photographs, films, and sound recordings, not only from ancient Egypt, but from all over the world. This is not just a resource for students and faculty studying the collections. It also allows international scholars, educators, and museum professionals outside UC Berkeley to engage with the material, even when, like now, the physical galleries cannot be fully open. In particular, the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum holds the largest Egyptological collection in North America, with more than 20,000 objects, most of which are unfortunately in storage rooms. These objects span 4,000 years of Egyptian history, from the pre-dynastic to the Coptic period, with nearly 3/4 of the material dating to the pre-dynastic and Old Kingdom eras. In fact, many don't know that the Hearst holds the most significant pre-dynastic collection outside Egypt itself. And this kind of digital initiative, such as the Hearst Online portal, highlights the strategic role of technology in modern museology. By digitizing collections, museums with limited physical space can amplify their impact, making objects and knowledge accessible to a much wider audience. For Egyptology in particular, this opens exciting opportunities to study, interact with, and even teach using 3D models of artifacts, allowing students to examine objects in unprecedented detail and fostering a richer, more interactive learning experience. In this way, technology is not just a convenience, it becomes a bridge between past and present, classroom and gallery, local study and global scholarship. As an Egyptologist, it made me reflect on the fact that technology not only provides new means for conservation and dissemination of world heritage, but it also bridges our past, present, and future. This is indeed an AI image I created, composing the alt text as bridge between ancient Egypt and the future. We could maybe even propose, inspired by this AI image, that technology does not seek to replace the museum. Rather, it extends the museum's reach beyond its physical walls, allowing us to visualize heritage wherever we choose to situate it, on a screen, in a classroom, or even in virtual space. Yet, in doing so, it inevitably engages with what Walter Benjamin described as the aura of authenticity in his seminal 1935 essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Writing about photography and film, Benjamin argued that new technologies fundamentally alter the nature of art by detaching it from the singularity of its original context. As he put it, even the most perfect reproduction of a work of art is lacking in one element: its presence in time and space, its unique existence at the place where it happens to be. For Benjamin, authenticity arises from this uniqueness, an object's material presence, its rootedness in history, and its embeddedness in cultural tradition. Reproduction, on the other hand, liberates the object from its ritual function, turning it into something political, accessible, and consumable on a mass scale. Here, I think, lies a fascinating question for us today. What would Benjamin make of immersive digital tools, especially virtual reality, that do not simply reproduce an artwork or artifact, but attempt to restore something of its ritual function? Perhaps Benjamin, if confronted with today's digital tools, might have been open to thinking in terms not only of traveling, but also of returning. For a museum object, virtually can stage what we might call a symbolic return home. The idea of going home has always been an essential motif in literature and poetry, a powerful conclusion to a journey, marking both closure and renewal. In the context of digital heritage, this notion resonates with what is now often described as digital repatriation, the use of virtual and 3D technologies to return digitized artifacts, images, and cultural materials to the communities from which they were once removed. This process of virtual traveling and returning is not simply about access. It becomes part of a broader discourse on decolonizing exhibition practices that I attempt to always include in my classes on digital humanities and Egyptology. By enabling communities to reconnect with cultural heritage that may be physically housed elsewhere, digital repatriation allows for new forms of knowledge making, knowledge that emerges from dialogue, recontextualization, and the act of symbolic return itself. In this sense, technology not only extends the museum, but also destabilizes it, shifting authority and opening up spaces for shared ownership, interpretation, again, cultural renewal. VR, virtual reality, offers the possibility of situating a cultural object back into a reconstructed environment, reconnecting it with context, and even enabling a form of experiential participation. Yet at the same time, these tools also make heritage infinitely reproducible, widely accessible, and subject to new modes of consumption. This tension between ritualization and mass accessibility might be precisely where the debate around digital heritage becomes most thought-provoking, and where pedagogy, when teaching in schools and universities with these tools, becomes crucial. Egyptology, similar to many other scholarly endeavors, increasingly makes use of digital tools for recording, studying, and presenting original material and research results. Digital Egyptology includes also the reflection on ethical questions around the digital applications and methods, as well as Egyptological questions. What are we digitizing and why? What is the function of our digital copies versus their original? Data are no longer considered value-free, while research questions and concerns can be difficult to deal with. The question raised by authenticity, virtual return, and digital repatriation are not only theoretical, they have direct implication for how we train the next generation of scholars. In the field of Egyptology, for instance, students must increasingly be equipped not only with philological and archaeological skills, but also with the ability to engage critically with digital tools and with the ethical questions that these tools bring to the surface. Many ancient Egyptian artifacts now reside far from their place of origin in museums that cannot always exhibit them as I say, due to space conservation, sometimes also political constraints. This means that paradoxically, the originals are often inaccessible both to the Egyptian public and to students abroad at the same time. And here 3D models, immersive reconstructions, and digital repatriation initiatives can provide an important bridge. They restore a measure of accessibility while also opening up new ways of rethinking ownership between technology, heritage, and ethics that I seek to address in the course I have developed at UC Berkeley, MELC 110. MELC is the abbreviation my department, Middle Eastern Languages and Culture, Digital Humanities and Egyptology, first offered in 2019. This is the first flyer of the course. Again, then I offered the course in 2023. I will offer it again next year. And the course introduces students of archaeology, Egyptology, art history, media studies, computer science. It has actually attracted students, undergraduate students, but also graduate students from a variety of fields and departments across campus. And so introduce all the students to the broader field of digital humanities, which has itself evolved from a primarily computer-based set of methods into a critical framework for rethinking research and representation, especially in the study of the past. And the success of the course has been possible thanks to the collaboration and support of the Hearst Museum and its staff, already mentioned, as well as thanks to research, teaching and learning, digital humanities, and the Berkeley Center for New Media of UC Berkeley. Together, these partnerships have made it possible to immerse students in hand-on work with 3D, VR, and AR technologies applied to the ancient Egyptian heritage, while encouraging them to interrogate how such tools can both democratize access to culture and unsettle long-standing practices of collecting, exhibiting, and interpreting as well artifacts. And so today I will share a few examples of student work from MELC 1 and 110, and I'm especially glad to do so at this university where Peter the Manuelian students engage in similar digital practices through the Giza project and the visualization lab, experimenting with 3D modeling, VR and AR reconstructions, and also interactive tools that allow them to visually enter tombs, manipulate monuments, and even link translation to replicas of Egyptian artifacts. So actually, Peter the Manuelian and his work has been a great inspiration also in building this course. What is most valuable for Egyptology students who can engage with this kind of tools is that they are not only learning cutting-edge technologies, but also confronting the already mentioned ethical questions of authenticity, speculation, but also colonial collecting and digital repatriation with critical reflection on the politics of heritage and access. And so my students in this course, together with the students of my Book of the Dead 3D project, and I will introduce the project later, have been deeply involved in digitizing artifacts from the ancient Egyptian collection of the Hearst Museum, and so they have gone beyond traditional 2D photography to create those 3D models of, at the beginning, just portable small objects, which are now being added also to the museum's portal, digital portal. University museums like the Hearst play indeed a crucial role precisely because they allow students and faculty to contribute actively to documentation, preservation, and interpretation, tasks that I think have become all the more urgent in our current world, shaped by war, displacement, and the growing threats of climate change to cultural heritage. Since the Hearst does not have permanent gallery spaces, we are experimenting with pop-up exhibitions in the small gallery space that we have at the moment, where original artifacts are displayed alongside their 3D printed or digital models. And one, I will show you the pop-up exhibition case, one of them later. But one of the objects we use for that is this so-called, an example of the so-called Chipus of Horus, or Horus on the crocodile, a magical healing object placed in temples inscribed with protective imagery of the god Horus, sometimes with text. This particular piece, though, dating to the post-pharaonic period, if it's authentic, raises indeed the fascinating questions of authenticity. Its script is in fact, you can see here the back that we didn't do in the model. In the model you can actually just see the side. So yeah, this is fantasy creation. The script is a fantasy creation. Its provenance, similar to many objects, most of the objects that we have at the Hearst remains uncertain. So it suggests that it may be a forgery. Yet forgeries too have value, at least I believe they do. They belong to the reception history of Egyptian culture, showing how ancient motifs were reinterpreted and sometimes fabricated in later context. Moreover, they offer valuable training opportunities for students who must learn to recognize forgeries as part of their preparation for museum and heritage careers. By combining original objects, replicas, and digital surrogates, we aim not only to broaden access, but also to foster critical reflection on, indeed, authenticity, but also reception and the very nature of cultural heritage. And I will return shortly on the broader and complex subject of originals versus copies in the preservation of heritage. For now, I will just show you a couple of particularly engaging artifacts that my students have enjoyed working on through 3D modeling. I need to here thank also Kia Johnston, my ex-PhD student, who has been also my first student research assistant for my digital humanities projects, in particular when photogrammetry was involved, and who is now continuing here as digital humanist at the Field Museum and the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures of the University of Chicago. So you will see some of the 3D models I'm using today were remade by her. The students, they all made their own models, but you can imagine they were their first approach to 3D, and for some of them also to Egyptian objects. So they are not always the best models. I still value the pedagogical function anyway, to have each of them working with the object and with the software. Another item of interest for my course has been a beautifully decorated wooden canopic box, originally discovered during George Reinsner's excavation at Nugget there. Although the box was brought to the museum together with this lid, research has shown that the lid does not in fact belong to it, and this is an illuminating reminder of how archaeological materials can become separated or mismatched during excavation, transport, or later curation. Canopic boxes of this type were specifically designed to contain the 4 canopic jars, each of which held one of the embalmed internal organs removed from the body during the mummification process. On their surfaces, it is common to find depiction of the 4 sons of Horus, Imseti, Hapi, Duamutef, and Kebes-Enwef, the divine guardians, entrusted with protecting the stomach, lungs, intestines, and liver of the deceased. Interestingly, the students decided to create a 3D model not of the box itself, but of its accompanying lid, captivated by the striking falcon that crowns its top more than my story about the 4 sons of Horus. Maybe I wasn't able to make them too passionate about the sons of Horus. Anyway, this choice provided a valuable teaching moment of offering the opportunity to reflect on how artifacts originating from different contexts can become associated with a museum setting, within a museum setting, sometimes leading to assumptions about their original use or provenance. It also highlighted one of the central responsibilities of heritage scholars and students alike, to carefully investigate the acquisition histories of objects, question their relationships, and trace the complex journeys that brought them into modern collections. We also have in the collection a set of canopic jars of uncertain origins whose lid is shaped with the heads of the 4 sons of Horus. And so one of the students then selected the baboon-shaped one that you see is moving, yes, and so representing Hapi. So this has been another object used the first time I've been teaching the course. And here you see the 3D model first with texture without painting, and then with the painting we've been discussing also different phases of production of those objects. So I find the 3D models also useful for this, for showing the students how the life of an artifact in the making and how it may have looked before being painted and used. Another object used for training students in photogrammetry has been this headrest. So this headdress, which is a common piece of ancient Egyptian furniture that also carried a ritual function. Headdresses were designed not only for sleeping, but also to protect the sleeper from harmful spirits during the night. And some examples are inscribed with magical text or decorated with protective imagery. But this particular specimen is undecorated, highlighting instead its simple functional form. And so by digitizing it in 3D, students can virtually pick it up, tilt it, compare its ergonomics to other known examples. And in this case also we were discussing the underside or the jointure of the joinery of the support. So little aspects that really help also to understand how an object is made. And so I try to not to use always beautiful objects, but also especially to have the students appreciate less beautiful objects, not just the museum highlights, but objects used by people every day. And so this will go into a discourse that Egypt is not made only of queens and kings, but also of normal people that were using not beautiful objects. Anyway, in both cases, the values of the 3D modeling is clear. It allows us to overcome the limitations of storage and display, to explore objects dynamically from multiple angles, and to train students to notice subtle details of craftsmanship and use. These digital surrogates do not replace the original artifacts, but they provide new opportunities for learning, teaching, and research, especially when the originals are fragile, inaccessible, or only partially visible. And so this is one of the temporary pop-up exhibition cases currently installed in the Hearst Gallery. And so we have those rotating displays designed to host the objects that students themselves have selected, scanned, and curated for my course, sometimes also for other courses that have nothing to do with digital humanities, actually. Some of the artifacts visible here, maybe you will recognize it, are the same ones I've highlighted before. You will recognize the baboon and the box, and here the little Horus Chippus, the headrest. I will now also work on this object. Importantly, these exhibitions are not simply about showcasing finished products. They provide a platform where students, most of whom are undergraduates, can make curatorial choices, experiment with presentation strategies, and reflect on the interpretative dimension of digital heritage work. Beyond the gallery, students also have been presenting their research and models during museum programs and departmental events, making their contribution visible to both academic and public audiences. Here, for instance, is Liam McEvoy, fourth-year UC Berkeley student, majoring in anthropology and minoring in Egyptology. I think he's on Zoom. Hi, Liam. Holding the artifacts he worked on, a lotus-shaped and lotus-decorated goblet made of green faience of uncertain origin and date, again. His choice of object was guided not only by personal interest. Liam is studying the Nymphea cerulea, the Egyptian blue lotus, and its psychedelic use in rituals. We have now at Berkeley a center for the study of psychedelics in societies. Really Berkeley. But also by the opportunities it offered for exploring the virtual and textual challenges of 3D modeling. By highlighting this specific piece, Liam took ownership of both the object's digital afterlife and the narrative he wanted to construct around it, demonstrating how students are not passive recipients of assignments, but active agents in shaping the direction of the course. For this project, Liam produced a 3D model using Meshroom in combination with his Samsung phone. Remarkably, the process took only a few minutes. At present, the class is also experimenting with accessible tools such as phone-based apps and lightweight scanning software, which stand in contrast to more traditional time-intensive photogrammetry or high-end 3D scanning equipment. And so, as Liam put it, and I'm quoting him, in less than 10 minutes, artifacts can be scanned and shared across the world in 3D space. When I asked him to comment about his work, that was his first comment. And his statement captures a recurring theme among the students, many of whom, being digital natives, lucky them, prioritize immediacy, portability and shareability over technical perfection. While the resulting models may not achieve the same resolution as those generated by advanced scanners, their speed and ease of production empower students to make their own methodological choices, privileging accessibility and dissemination. In this way, the course foregrounds student agency not only in object selection, but also in determining which digital practices best serve their goals as emerging heritage scholars. And here you see also a series of GIFs of each of the different registers of the goblet and an analysis of them. The bottom is a classic lotus design, middle is bats holding stalks of plants, then the top is geese running around reeds. Those are, by the way, slides made by Liam. And Liam realized how the 3D model can be a pedagogical tool to help showcase different symbolism and complex designs often lost in 2D images. For example, the geese, a symbol of Geb, the earth god in ancient Egypt, are running across a marsh, symbolic realm of creation. And then the two plants Bess is holding appear to be the papyrus in one end, the lotus in the other, symbols of Upper and Lower Egypt. So there's a lot to unpack while looking at the 3D model. A future idea is to 3D scan objects under UV light as modern adhesive and invisible ancient residues glow brightly under UV. Modern adhesive appear bright orange here, and the imprint of an ancient person's lips can be seen glowing white on the lip of the cup. A UV 3D model can also be an educational tool when learning about conservation and how objects have been altered for conservation, or even just how when you look at things in a different light, pun intended, says Liam, they often tell different stories. And here I was quoting indeed Liam's again. To conclude with Liam's, I'm very excited about this work actually. The study of the goblet indeed sparkled interest in our Egyptological community at Berkeley, and he was able to be awarded an AIRC Northern California grant, AIRC, the American Research Center in Egypt grant, to continue his research that bridges archaeology, digital humanities, but also chemistry, since he's now doing a residue analysis of this goblet as well as some other objects at the museum to reconstruct their history one molecule at a time. And so I find really fascinating to use digital methods, 3D reconstructions with hard science methods and chemistry. When I've been teaching MELC 110 in spring 2023, we have introduced also VR headsets and technology in the classroom. The Oculus Quest in particular, kindly provided by Research Teaching and Learning with the help of Chris Hoffman, Noah Wittman, and Owen McGrath. It has been very interesting to explore with the students the use of virtual reality to recreate the past, and we have learned through a survey how certain students enjoy the experience more than others. So it's not new to use virtual reality in the classroom, but I think we really need more studies to understand if the students are really enjoying the experience, because the results I had were kind of mixed. Anyway, in MERC 10, the students and I together created what we called a digital classroom. While we were physically seated in the same room, we also inhabited a shared virtual environment where students had the freedom to experiment with new ways of presenting their research. This one was not a space I dictated, rather it was one the students helped shape, both through the objects they choose to work with and the digital methods they decided to employ. Within this environment, students designed and displayed their projects in a virtual museum. Here you see them posing for a group photo with their avatars, an image that symbolized their collective authorship of the space. My avatar was really the worst of all. They had much more fantasy than I did. But I'll do better. The good thing with avatars is you can always redo it. It's not with the real body, right? Their agency extended beyond simple content creation. They tested what it means to be present digitally, how avatars can embody identity, and how heritage might be experienced through play, exploration, and collaboration. Especially play, they were jumping all around the room all the time. It was really interesting. One of the projects that illustrates this especially well is Beatrice De Faveri, one of my actually graduate students, exploration of copies and fakes. She independently chose to use AI to recreate the famous zodiac of the Temple of Dendera, not simply for the challenge of production, but to ask deeper questions. How accurate are AI-generated copies? What ethical issues arise when technology begins to intervene in the reproduction of cultural heritage? Beatrice's voice comes through clearly in her own words. This was the result she got with DALL-E, and she wrote that, well, it's a bit too long maybe, and I see I'm a bit running out of time, but she was writing as the experiment with the Dendera zodiac shows AI-generated images of ancient Egyptian antiquities do not display the degree of resemblance and accuracy required of a copy, let alone of an actual forgery. Even less specific prompts, ancient Egyptian temple or hieroglyphs, have resulted in an Egyptianizing style at best. Of course, this happened in 2023. The machine is learning more and more. I'm sure now one will get a better result. Still, there are still really issues of what kind of copies we are getting when we use this kind of technology and how are we going to use it. And Beatrice's project anyway demonstrates how students were not only producing digital outputs, but also setting their own research agendas, asking critical, even philological questions about the nature of heritage in the digital age and what AI can do. And in fact, I'm encouraging my students also in other classes to use AI with some critical thinking attached to it, of course. This brings us to the broader theme of copies and originals. As heritage scholars, we must constantly grapple with the ethics of replication. How do we create and use digital or physical replicas responsibly? What does it mean to reproduce, to simulate, or to stand in for an original? And here I turn to Hillel Schwartz's provocative words in The Culture of the Copy, a book that inspired me a lot. An object uncopied is under perpetual siege, valued less for itself than for the struggle to prevent its being copied. The more adept the West has become at the making of copies, the more we have exalted uniqueness. It is within an exuberant world of copies that we arrive at our experience of originality. And this reflection reminds us that 3D models and printed replicas are not just technical tools. They act as avatars of the objects they represent, opening questions of identity, authenticity, and uniqueness. I'm repeating this word many times because I think it's really important. And so for my students, deciding whether to prioritize accessibility, accuracy, or creativity in their digital replicas was itself an intellectual exercise in agency. We could say by choosing both their objects of study and the technologies of reproduction, the students were not merely completing assignments, they were actively engaging with fundamental debates in heritage studies. And perhaps more importantly, they were discovering how replicas, especially in 3D, can become powerful instruments for teaching, sharing, and reimagining the cultural legacy of ancient Egypt. The study of copies and replicas has long been central to art history and heritage studies. The concept of ideal plastique, Greek-style statues, not replicating a single prototype but expressing an ideal form, shows how copies and imitations blur the boundary between reproduction and creativity. For centuries, museums have displayed Roman works with labels such as copy after a Greek original, an interpretative framework dating back to Winkelmann and the 18th century copy and critique. By 1970s, however, scholars began reframing these works as authentic expressions of Roman culture, not mere shadows of Greek originals. This debate, whether copies are subordinate, creative, or independent, remains alive and raises broader questions. To what extent can copies generate their own artistic value, and how do they shape our experience of the past? In digital heritage, these issues resurface with new urgency. A 3D replica is not just a neutral stand-in for an original. It can reshape meaning, guide restoration, and even influence ownership debates. And I think nowhere in this is this clearer than in the case of one of the most iconic works of Egyptian art, the bust of Queen Nefertiti, discovered in 1912 by Burkhard at Amarna. The bust immediately became an object of contention, and so we know now is in Berlin, and Zahi Hawass, Egypt, want it back. And so the bust is at the center of disputes. Digital technologies have only heightened the debate. In 2016, German artist Nora Al-Badri and Gian Nicolai Nelles staged the provocative Nefertiti hack, claiming to have clandestinely scanned the bust and released its 3D dataset online as the other Nefertiti. And this was framed as an act of digital repatriation, and so was a project to challenge colonial possession of antiquities while inviting global audiences to download, print, remix the Queen's image. And so this is indeed a way to use 3D technologies too. Contemporary artists too have taken up Nefertiti as a symbol in debates over identity and representation. In 1993, Fred Wilson reimagined the bust in 5 different skin tones, challenging the whitewashed portrayals of ancient Egypt that dominated Western scholarship and museum display. His work underscores how much of Nefertiti's racial identity is projected onto her. Her original painted surface is lost, and the surviving reddish tones reflect Egyptian artistic convention, not literary skin color. Wilson Nefertiti's thus became becomes a critique of historical erasure, reminding us that Egypt was an African civilization with diverse populations, not the homogeneous white culture of the 19th, 20th century narratives often implied. And so this intervention, whether by digital activists or contemporary artists, force us to reconsider what is at stake in reproducing ancient artifacts. As Schwartz, again, has noted in the culture of the copy, an object uncopied is under perpetual siege. Copies and replicas, whether physical, digital, or conceptual, are not passive doubles, but active agents in shaping the value and meaning of the original. And in this sense, a 3D model is not merely an educational tool or preservation technique. It is a medium, I believe, in its own right. Again, we could say an avatar of the artifact that can travel, multiply, provoke new conversations. I've been working, going back to the Hearst Museum, to a group of guardian statues that is actually just one statue of a group from a tomb in Thebes, Asasif, of the 25th dynasty, the famous tomb of Montuemat. Those statues that are now spread out around museums around the world, were probably placed in niches in the burial chamber of the tomb, protecting the burial chamber, but today they are indeed dispersed around the world. And at the Hearst Museum, we are fortunate enough to have one of them currently in display in temporary exhibition that I curated. I'm now actively working to scan additional statues of the group in Egypt and Europe. This scan was kindly made, again, in a few minutes by our Peter Dermanuelian when he came to visit. My wish would be to digitally repatriate them into a virtual reconstruction of the tomb's burial chamber, an underground space close to tourists and barely accessible even to archaeologists because of its poor air quality. This other model was made, I found it in Cairo in the new museum in the GEM. When I saw that they put it out, I was very excited. Of course, there are many challenges, though, to do these reconstructions when you cannot access all the objects. Beyond statues, coffins, and I am almost, I will arrive soon to my conclusions. Behind statues, coffins and sarcophagi are proving especially well suited for photogrammetry. The Hearst Museum houses a remarkable collection of decorated coffins, most of them long hidden in storage. In this temporary exhibition, I was able to bring two of them to light. I'm using this exhibition again for class visits. Here a photo with the enthusiastic students of my other course, Introduction to the Ancient Middle Eastern Worlds, again, undergraduates for the first time in touch with Egyptian artifacts. My work with undergraduate students has also been fundamental for my Book of the Dead in 3D project, where we realized 3D models of coffins annotated so that we can also look at the decoration and at the text. And I've been using mostly sarcophagi, coffins from the Hearst Museum. But the idea will be in the moment in which there will be funds again for us, for humanists, to expand the project, and so just includes other coffins from minor museums that are not in exhibition, because Most of our, because of, so this is Egyptian material, Egyptian heritage. We also maintain an Arabic version of the website, thanks to some of my students and external Egyptian collaborators who help to translate the website. And I strongly believe that this should be done for all heritage in the original languages of the country where they come from. More recently, we have a second platform run entirely by students, even with the new logo that I like a lot. And so again, this was especially to create agency and to let the students be in full charge of this work, of course, with some supervision. I can say that it's also amazing how all kinds of students from all fields really enjoy going in the storage rooms. Storage rooms have their own fascination. It's true that we see them negatively because we want everything out, but the storage room is a special place. It's a magical place. It's a bit of a discovery. It's like going in a new tomb sometimes. And so we had a really always great time with the students. Also for learning to handle the material, the objects, especially the coffins, and how to try and get good photos, for instance, even in poor light conditions or poor space conditions, since we do not have anyway a real lab for doing these scans. A central, as I say, central interest of the Book of the Dead in 3D has been doing annotations, and in fact I use the website also for my language courses when I teach ancient Egyptian, and so I think 3D annotated models are also useful for teaching the language, definitely. It's much more fun than just studying on a grammar. And finally, from this project, then I start to first lead and then co-lead a new project called The Return to the Tomb, together with Elaine Sullivan of UC Santa Cruz. This project seeks to virtually restore the sarcophagus lid acquired of Samtec, our first case study of the Book of the Dead in 3D. It was acquired by William Randolph Hearst in 1900, brought to Berkeley in 1903 by boat, and is one of the few objects at the Hearst Museum of which we know the real tomb, of one of the few, actually the only coffin that we have of which we know the tomb. And so there was a good occasion indeed to recreate the tomb. And so with the Return to the Tomb project, we are actually recreating the landscape, the tomb, and then we place the 3D model of the sarcophagus with the annotations in the tomb. This is still in progress. We still need the texture of the tomb, the texture of the necropolis. I have a small, a short demo, although it's a bit too late, maybe. I'm not sure, shall I maybe stop soon? There was audio here. There is a voice that can guide you, but we've been, for now, it's like coming from space once you have the Oculus on it, and then you descend finally into the tomb. I can jump maybe how you see the tomb from outside. This is a shaft tomb from the 26th dynasty near the Pyramid of Unas, and to access the burial chamber there is a 30-meter deep shaft, and we first were descending through the shaft, but realized that that was making sick a lot of people, and so now we enter like a ghost through the wall. And as you can see, I need to still populate the tomb. We are hunting for pieces, shabtis, and other objects that were in the tombs in Cairo still. And for the text of the walls, we need first the permission of the German mission that has been working on it. Unfortunately, Ramadan Hussein was working at the epigraphic mission of the 26th dynasty cemetery in Saqqara, passed away, but he has been always very supportive of this project. And in fact, we started with a team of students. You see, my UC Berkeley students were especially working on the formatting the sarcophagus through Blender for Unity, so the VR app. They were having fun scaling and doing everything. The UC Santa Cruz team has been working on the reconstruction of the cemetery and the tomb. More recently, we joined forces with Ayman El-Geveli, Virginia Tech, and Matthias Lang, Bonn Center for Digital Humanities at the University of Bonn. Some bibliography. What we want to expand now this project and add the neighboring tombs, and so with the sarcophagi, since we know where they are. So hopefully, again, this will be a bigger project once we can secure more funds. And so, as we look into the future, and here I'm concluding, I see 3D modeling not simply as a tool, but as a medium, as I say, in its own right, one that allows us to examine ancient objects in detail, to recontextualize them within their original environment. And I think the process is as important as the product. When students work hands-on with 3D technologies, photographing, scanning, annotating, and publishing models, they are not just consuming knowledge, they are creating it, and they gain insight into how objects functioned. And here, I want to conclude by saying that I think that the way they gain insight into how objects function in ancient Egypt through 3D is different than when using AI-generated imagery. AI can simulate, but it shortcuts the essential steps of observation, decision-making, and interpretation. By contrast, the process of making a 3D model requires attention, patience, and creativity. It cultivates precisely the kind of active learning that fosters critical thinking and deeper understanding. As Jean Piaget once said, the object of education is to create men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. In that spirit, 3D technologies are not just about representing the past, they are about training future generations to engage with the heritage in meaningful, innovative, and responsible ways. Thank you.